So this is about putting your money where your heart is, sort of the more micro level of what I was talking about a minute ago. So I'm just going to make the transition, a couple of small points, and then would love to sort of talk generally about how this is reacting on the ground in Chambersburg. Sort of, talk a little bit about how this sort of plays out in the real world for you guys. So, I'm sorry, I take this window out. So I want to talk about whether or not concentrating diversity is good or bad economically, right? So we'll do this sort of big way and small way, and this will talk about whether or not it makes sense to put your money where your heart is, or whether or not that makes a difference. I made the argument at the beginning of my last presentation that it's difficult to see, it's difficult to compare how different countries are diverse when diversity is actually an important economic factor for countries. Well, that's true as a snapshot. It's not true when you look at it over time longitudinally. And so there was this big study done about 10 years ago where folks looked at every single thing they could look at about county level data from 1840 to 1920, and then tracked what aspects of those impacted success for those counties in the future. So the main factor for that was per capita income. So looking at 2010 per capita income, what was it about those places, between 150 and 100 years earlier that made this per capita income important? And what they found was that it was more or less diversity is what had done it. So what you see here, this is just looks at the population. This looks at the U.S. sort of state of play for population in those years. Fun little map here that shows how diverse these communities were. Now this just looks at the diversity count includes African Americans. It wasn't just Italian versus Irish, but this map does include counting African Americans. You can see not a lot of ethnic diversity in the Southeast. And you can see, in fact, Franklin County is sort of the place where it starts to transition, right? This is, if you look at this line here, that's kind of, Franklin County is sort of on the line of where the transition to diversity began 100 years ago. And what they found was that there are 3 different variables that remain statistically significant no matter what. And that was fractionalization. And fractionalization sounds bad, but fractionalization is actually the representation of different groups in the county. So the more ethnically diverse the county was, you can see the coefficient size positive means it has a positive impact on per capita income. Negative means it has a bad. Fractionalization, the more fractionalized it was, the greater impact it has on per capita income. So for every county, the counties, if they were more ethnically diverse in 1840, 1850, 1860 through 1910, the better off they were now, controlling for everything else. Polarization is how often they interact. And so the more polarized they are, it means the more segregated they are. This is true both geographically and in sort of social networking. So the more polarized they are means the less they communicate, the worse they do, right? So it doesn't help to have, a Black community, Italian community, an Irish community, a Jewish community, a Hmong community, a Arab Muslim community, a African community, a Finnish community, and have them walled off from each other. That doesn't help, right? They need to be unwalled off from each other. The polarization level needs to be down to enjoy the benefits of fractionalization. Concentration is that it's sort of the other side of polarization, which is why it sort of moves in the same way. It's the fact that they sort of live together. There is a Koreatown, Italian town, Chinatown, right? So that's sort of the geographic concentration of all of them. And so over time, it's important, right? And one of the chambers I work with a lot is the Hagerstown Chamber. And Paul Fry is the head of the Hagerstown Chamber. And I don't think I've ever heard him give a presentation where he didn't say that the best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to do it's today, right? So building these communities for the future is very important. So when I talk about this in the community aspect, I talk about it like companies, frankly, have to make some pretty hard decisions if they're going to invest in employees, right? Like for employees are going to be, inclusive and diverse, you have to invest in them, either them or their experience. Like wages aren't going to be enough. And my response is, what happens if you don't invest in them? They stick around, right? You've got to, companies and communities have to decide that you've got to keep, you got to keep the most productive people, and not necessarily most productive in an economic sense, but you've got to keep the most productive people for your community. So you have to invest in them to do so. And this is what happens in the workforce. Like when the workforce talks about this, they talk about it in a way that, why retention is so important. And this is primarily about women. This is from a women's focused study, but I think it's important here that women and men leave work at the same rate. The exact same percentage of men and women left their jobs in the past year voluntarily, 100%. Almost all of them do it for the same reason. They take a role at a different company. Only 2% of women that left the workforce did so to focus on their family, right? And so there needs to be sort of this idea that investing in them is not sort of a zero-sum game. You'll be able to sort of reap those investments in the long term. This looks at sort of the pipeline, why investment in people is important, because the entry level, this is across about 300 like large companies. The demographics at the entry level are essentially the demographics of the United States. But every time you take a promotion step up, it gets worse, right? So it's these long-term investments that are important. So I want to talk a little bit about authenticity, right? And I know there's going to be a breakout, I think, in the next set of breakouts about this. But it's important here because I want to make it clear that, as I ended before, you have to not only that you have to be able to make sure these things are authentic. I think Jim asked about the C-suite. I think it's from my previous slide here. I can show that. So, well, my window's in the way. So, yeah, the breakup of the C-suite is relatively tilts pretty high to white men and white women. So just showing that for everybody. I can share these as well. And making sure that it's authentic, because people are going to be able to see through your authenticity. And you see this a lot. We've seen a lot more, frankly, in the past year after George Floyd. But it became sort of a longstanding issue with what was called rainbow washing. So every time Pride comes around in June, you got every major company putting out a Pride flag, right? And this was local in DC. A large national bank put up 2 Pride flags, and then this went around sort of one of the DC like neighborhood blogs or something, because there's an understanding that large companies or communities might not really get it, and the authenticity about it's important. But it's not just sort of the jokes, right? So this made pretty significant headlines in 2019. So when Taiwan legalized gay marriage in late 2019, the summer before, there was a wedding of a clerk at HSBC. Her parents refused to walk her down the aisle. And so her boss at HSBC walked her down the aisle. Now, Taiwan has very conservative views on LGBT rights, and certainly did before it was legalized in 2019. And this became a really top feel-good story, right? That this Taiwan CEO of HSBC sort of made this public statement, and an employee needed support, walked the employee down the aisle, right? Well, unfortunately, it's not how it isn't always how it worked out in the public, right? Because people still dislike HSBC for all the stuff they said they did, right? That there's, HSBC was money laundering, human transport, drug money, etc. Well, the support that came for HSBC didn't excuse their activity, right? But the support came from an individual saying like, hey, look, this isn't the same guy that does that. HSBC, this guy's cool for helping out his employee. And so making sure that the authenticity is there is really important, because people are not going to necessarily just change their spending habits because you put up a pride flag or because you put a Black Lives Matter sign outside, right? That's not enough anymore, right? That's, I think, one of the questions asked, the difference between diversity and inclusion, right? The diversity aspect is the fact that, like, yeah, sure, I mean, the sign puts a BLM sign outside, but if it doesn't actually mean anything, right? If it's a ploy, not a ploy, but if it's done without thought and intention, that's not inclusive, and that's not going to be sufficient. Open up, have conversation, questions, thoughts, comments.
Can I ask you a question? This is
Which
Marvin.
you would. Hey, Marvin, sure.
And I really have appreciated your presentation, your keynote, and this presentation. Question for you: the way that you kind of introduced Nordstrom's ad, and I love the questions that you posed. Right? You didn't decide to educate her; you decided to engage her, which is very different, by the way, because it forces her to participate in the conversation, and not just get away with what she said. Right? So I love that. Sure. So when you look at this, what comes to mind for me is when I look at organizations and schools, right? The question becomes, why do we need people of color to be part of the teaching staff? What's the big deal for that, right? And I think your questions are good, right? And what would be some of those questions that could be asked of a administrator or a teacher who asked the question? There seems to be a lot of people in the interviewing pool for new teachers, and there may be 2%, but it seems like a lot because when you're not accustomed to having any, it looks like a lot.
Yeah.
But I think the same could be said true about young men who walk in neighborhoods in groups of 2 or 3 is a gang, because they're not accustomed to seeing one single person walk. So when you put 3 together, it's like suspect, right? So what would be some questions you would ask someone in education who says, why do we need all of these candidates of color, and why do we even need teachers of color? What's the value in that? What would be your question for them?
Sorry, I got a couple of things that Jack here I'll also address. Well, funny enough, my mother-in-law was a teacher in the Cleveland school, so it's a conversation I've had a few times. So there's a few things here. So Ida asks parents who are recent immigrants when and from where and why typically racist. So they are Russian. And so there is, even though there is a political sort of equality in Russia at the time, that wasn't the case on the ground. And on top of that, they're Jewish. And so they aren't racist because they're Jewish, but their experience in Soviet Russia as Jews was a racist experience. And so Soviet Jews were not Soviet citizens. They have Jewish passports, right? And so they come from a system where treating people differently because of who they are, that was how they were, that was the system in which they lived. That system they continue to live in, right? That it's sort of politically natural to keep people in buckets because that's how they are delineated. So that sort of addresses that background question. God, I hope she doesn't see this recording. Okay. Or my wife, frankly, for that matter. Let's try to keep it from saying it. But Marvin, your question about the teachers, my mother-in-law worked in a Cleveland suburb that when they moved there in '94 was 95% white, 96% white. And by the time she retired, a year ago was maybe 20% white. So she lived in it as as the white population declined. And whew, man, those are these exact conversations we're having, Marvin, were the tough ones, right? And for her, right, she sort of backed it up with, in '94, it was one of the top performing high schools in the country, right? And just happened to be in this neighborhood that got rezoned once or twice, and population demographics changed, and people, both, the city suburb thing happened. And now it's a typical high school now, frankly. But she sort of saw these, we had teachers with PhDs and this, that, and the other, and then didn't see why they had to change the nature, because all she saw was that we have the best teachers in the state. She sees these, chemistry PhDs and math PhDs and people that were teaching at colleges that are coming to teach this high school. And she didn't see the value in, well, we've got on paper the best teachers. Why would we not just take on paper the best teachers? And to your point, which is different than even everyone's the same. Let's take someone who looks different, right? The challenge there, for her at least, was that you have to figure out that these kids they're not in school to learn integrals and derivatives. I mean, that's nice, right? But schools are there to learn kids how to be citizens, right? The training is kind of secondary. And if they don't have examples of people that look like them, it's going to be much harder. They're going to find those examples from somewhere, right? And if you can, particularly as a educational institution, if you can find good examples for kids to follow, it's going to be easier for them to find them. Because you don't know if a kid goes off to find an example of adult they want to be, and you have no control over who that kid's going to pick, right? But at the very least, you put good examples in the school, then you at least give them a fighting chance of picking good examples moving forward. And I don't know. I mean, and I'm frankly, I'm interested. Like, what is the Chambersburg, what's the school system like? Is it a single county district? Are there, charter schools, a lot of private schools? Oh, thank you. Are there charter schools, private schools? What's the ed system look like in Chambersburg?
Chambersburg School District is pretty diverse. About 10,000 students, and 1,000 of them are ELL students. And so the population has changed significantly in the school district over time. And I know a lot of the data you presented regarding the MSA census area kind of dilutes the diverse population in Chambersburg Borough. And I think it's really reflected in our school district.
So the school district only handles Chambersburg proper?
No, actually, there's outlying areas that are to the Chambersburg district. It is actually larger, but there is a significant student population, and it's grown over the years. That's very diverse.
Okay. And is Marvin's question part of a broader debate?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, someone else was going.
I was going to say, as Noel was saying, there are portions of Franklin County, like where I live, where there's very little diversity. Chambersburg represents most of the diversity, I guess, in Waynesboro, maybe a little bit in the county. So the rest of the county is pretty rural and pretty white.
So there is a Chambersburg school district and then other school districts in the county. I see.
Yeah, there's like 5 or 6 school districts in the county.
Yeah. So is that all right? Let's put all the cards down. So, Mecklenburg versus North Carolina set the fact up that you can't bus kids across school districts, right? To level them out for integration purposes for schools. And so a lot of and then Southern school districts were federally barred from being able to redraw their school districts. Non-Southern counties and municipalities were able to. And so Columbus, Ohio, technically their school districts still aren't integrated because there is an S-shaped Columbus City School District that eats into every major African-American pocket neighborhood in Columbus. And then all of the suburbs kind of like will take little chunks of pockets of Columbus that aren't diverse. And so, and that passes federal law because the feds don't have to check Columbus's school district lines, and you can't be forced to bus kids across school districts. And so, is that the, and I'm not saying it is, but it could, is that the case Chambersburg? You're shaking your head no, Ken. I guess no one's saying yes, so I'm guessing that's not the case. Okay.
Well, I think oftentimes the part that we miss in both organizations, businesses, and school districts is that having a diverse population or having a diverse clientele, and the importance of having those who serve that clientele to be representative of their clients, that often we lean towards it being a benefit for people of color only, but it's an incredible benefit for white people as well. And let's stay with the school district, for example.
Yeah.
There's great value, and you're probably aware, Lawrence, there's been some studies about when white students, for the first time in their experience, have someone of color in front of the room, and what that experience has been like for white students. It's been pretty incredible, by the way. And so I think it's important that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it doesn't just benefit people of color, it benefits people who are not of color. And I think when we get to a point where we understand that that value is holistic, and it doesn't separate itself out, everyone wins, you know, and most importantly, I think we're doing a disservice anywhere when we don't try to be as diversified as possible so that students are exposed to a variety of individuals. They begin to then develop an idea about the capacity and the capability of all people. But if it's the same type of person in front of the room, the belief becomes the only people that belong in front of the room are the people that look like this. And so my hope is that businesses and school districts alike see that this value of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a benefit for all of us, not for some of us.
So I had a question related, like what you were just talking about like authenticity, right? And that in a community of our size, we have to really look at small businesses in the sub, 500, sub even 50 employee range. And I think that there's a lot of businesses are feeling like they want or seeing that they need to start doing DEI work and evaluating their practices and kind of going through this process, and may at the end of that process come up with policies or words on paper. And so how do you, as like a community member, not walking out with your feet as a millennial like I am, but if the policies, if the words ultimately are empty and are not upheld or inauthentic, how do you best address that disconnect? Because I think that is going to be a significant challenge moving forward as companies, local government, all of these people and players figure out where do they fit in this evolving landscape, and how do they fail forward instead of not trying to make that effort or making the effort in word only. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, just from like a chamber level, since we do, I think these are things that we're experiencing in our community today, right now, very relevantly. So that's my question.
So I'll open this up in just a moment, but I borrow from sort of Marvin's point about engaging instead of educating, right? I argue that particularly for small businesses, and this is something I say but don't write down because you see it written down, it looks weird, is that small business owners are by their nature small c conservative, right? If you've owned a small business for 4 years, you've outlived half of all small businesses, right? And you didn't get there by sort of rethinking how you got there in the first place, right? If a small business owner sort of latches on to like, whoo, all right, I got lightning in a bottle. I got 10, 15, 20 employees, and I've outlived every other restaurant or whatever, you aren't going to convince them that like, well, yeah, you have this really, you have a great sort of non-discrimination policy, but it's not really put into practice. You got to really think that they're going to, that's not going to resonate. Right? It's not going to resonate because like if you're talking to them as a 5+ year business owner, they're more successful than half everyone who's tried. Right. And so you've got to engage them in a way that really sort of opens up, gives them paths forward and not sort of corrections go paths backward. When you think about, the bathrooms thing are so easy to go to, so I hate using examples, but I will, right? If you can, talk to them and say, hey, look, it's actually, you have 2 gendered bathrooms. It's actually, it can be quite simple to go to 2 non-gendered bathrooms, right? And if that's a big deal, there are certainly other ways in which you can say like, hey, look, you've done this, which is great. We appreciate the sentiment. They can be executed this, that, and the other. Larger, and when I say large, I mean more than 50 employees, like, so not massive companies. They have to deal with this in 2 different ways. They deal with it, one, in this way, right, being authentic, and they deal with it in a way that, look, if you're a company and you start engaging more heavily in diverse and inclusive activities, and not all of your employees might appreciate that, right? There definitely, there are times when, hey, you've got folks that just aren't into it, right? And for them, and a lot of times, if those people are the wrong people, if those people are specific people in the organization, it can make the move to being inclusive, diverse and inclusive really difficult, right? And sometimes, and this isn't really, even massive companies aren't really ready for this. Like, they aren't ready for a handful of vocal people who are like, what, we need to get the best people for the job. Who cares what they look like? We need to, and they need to be ready to deal with that internally, which is different, frankly, dealing with it externally. And so I think there's, to your point, there's a difference between dealing with those from inside and outside, and the company's ready for both of them.
If I could add to that, because that's a great question, right? I think we understand that when movement occurs, it's because you hit them where it hurts. And what I mean by that, that if there's a public statement that's written, yet there's no demonstration of such a statement being played out in the business or their connection or involvement in the community, we then need to ask questions. Help us understand your mission and your activity. And so then one decides, am I going to support a business that lacks authenticity and integrity? Am I going to patronize? If we're not willing to make those kind of difficult choices, you're right, Lawrence. We're doing fine. We don't have to move anything about. We don't have to make any changes. We don't have to become inclusive. We don't need to be doing any DI training. We're successful. Our employees are happy. It will continue. But if we're looking for organizations to be an active participant in what we're trying to create as a community, there has to be some expectations, or at least some questions about, are you who you say you are, and how is that being demonstrated? And so if we don't do those kinds of things, or at least have those kinds of conversation, I think you're absolutely right. Why bother? We're good, and we'll be good long after this conversation is over. And so we must be strategic in the questions that we ask. And to some degree, how do we demand certain things from certain people who have articulated that they're one thing and demonstrating the complete opposite?
Jim, go ahead, please. Jim, you're a little quiet. I don't know if it's we can hear you, but you're just touch quiet.
Let me present an example. Is that better? an example of what both Marvin and Rachel have spoken about with authenticity, but also connecting to the schools. So it's no secret to folks who know me that I am not a fan of Chick-fil-A for a number of reasons. And still no.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A. Yeah, we got you, Jim. Yeah.
Okay. And Chick-fil-A is our major sponsor of our school's athletic facility. So I'm a coach. I coach track and in the school district, and I consider, every time I walk into that facility, I see the big Chick-fil-A logo on there. I'm sure they're promoting, the athletic programs with a whole lot of money. But what does that mean to a student who's in that LGBTQ plus community as they walk in, to that complex, either as a fan or as an active participant. So that to me is a really good example of that authenticity. And it's not a secret that they do a lot of community work otherwise as well. So it's that mix of, they do a lot of community work, but where are they on the authenticity when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what can we do about that?
Oof, man, this is recorded, right? So there's definitely, and Chick-fil-A is an interesting example, because Chick-fil-A is one of the examples where it's not a, man, who's going to see this video? Okay, well, this is public. There was a controversy a few years ago with Barilla, the pasta company, and I'll just sort of Barilla. I mean, they've never really done anything inclusive or diverse. At least they hadn't 3 years ago. Didn't really have anything to sort of lay their hat on. And then the founder, it's founded by family, and the current family founder said some really disparaging homophobic remarks, and talked to his comms team and said, look, let's get a PR thing. Let's get in front of it, this, that, and the other. Have a press, and they do a press conference. This is in Italian. They do a press conference, and someone asks, and the comms team puts a plant in the reporter pool and says, will you sort of respond to these homophobic comments? And he goes to the microphone, he says, I don't want homosexuals eating my pasta. Right? And for that, Barilla, they blew up, right? It was, and they have nothing else to back up. Chick-fil-A is a little different in the fact that there are other aspects of their work, to your point, Jim, other aspects of their community engagement work that are perfectly like above board, right? And even in the racial space, right? They have amazing franchisee, they have amazing racial diversity in their franchisee rates, right? Which is something that's really difficult for a lot of franchisee companies to do. And so what's difficult, to your point, what's difficult about that is for all of the African American kids that are coming through the same field that aren't in the LGBT community, that works for them, right? And I would assume this is sort of both the local franchisee and not Chick-fil-A corporate who funds this. Okay, so and for the local franchisee, I'm sure he is aware, but he might not he might not agree either actively or inactively. So it's not even on his radar necessarily, unless it's been put on his radar since he's done it. Like when he made the decision, it wasn't on his radar that there are. Yes, there are people that my corporation have. There are folks who people in my corporation leadership have denigrated. I am happy to support this, and there may not be the connection being made between the two. So the franchisee thing is kind of strange, or not strange. It complicates things in this sense. But it's going to take talking to people in Atlanta, right? Unfortunately, not the franchisee who's living in Chambersburg and owns 3 Chick-fil-A's or whatever, right? And that's what sort of complicates it. But talking to them, usually the best way to do that's internally. So, sorry, anyone wanted to jump in? Because I will say, if someone doesn't want to jump in, they can in a second. Because what I have seen in the past is, mid-sized companies who are, and I would count Chick-fil-A as a large mid-sized company, like mid-sized companies that are really trying to get this right. And there are individuals who aren't in leadership, right? But maybe, senior management who are slowing things down. And if they don't get in line, they get let go, right? And that's that happens quietly, right? Because imagine the firestorm is going to happen when someone gets fired because they aren't inclusive enough, right? So it happens, but it is happening. It is happening.
Lawrence, I'm going to share something with you about an asset management company, billion-dollar company. In a training we did a little bit ago, the CEO does the introduction of the diversity, equity, inclusion training with this statement. We have 9 potential clients who are in the funnel who are not ready to do business with us until we can demonstrate a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. What is your strategic plan? The second training, the number went from 9 to 21 clients on hold, waiting to see if this organization is authentic about being committed to diversity, equity, inclusion as a part of the fabric of the organization. Now, the power in that is that those employees who didn't think that it was important or necessary to have that kind of training now recognize that their wallets are being impacted, their purses are being impacted because of the lack of diversity, equity, inclusion commitment. And that's what I'm experiencing with corporate clients right now. And to your second point, really another company who was trying to decide whether or not they need to start scheduling exit interviews, because there are some people who are not willing to lean in that direction. Although the majority is, there's some people who have great influence, and there's a few of them who refuse to budge. And so that's just 2 examples to your point.
Yeah, the increase, this downstream, there's greater downstream attention to contracts, particularly corporate contracts. You have to, and it's going to be happening more and more, right? As larger companies, as investors sort of care more because it actually has positive returns on their economic outcomes. They're going to have to go downstream to their tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, which means, there might not be a Fortune 50 company in Chambersburg headquartered there, but there sure are suppliers for them that are, right? And then at some point, you're going to have to deal with that, and that's happening more and more. That's always been the case for federal contracts, right? And that's growing. But it's the challenge, and I think that the challenge, Marvin, the challenge, and one thing that we're working with big companies on at the chamber is that big companies can't go to a supplier and say, prove to me you're inclusive and diverse, full stop, period, right? Like, we need to come up with something like relatively standard that they can hand them and say, oh, here's this, like, here's a form that everyone who you might supply is going to hand you something almost exactly the same, right? So you can fill out the same thing, have it on file, add this, right? And then keep that going, keep it like, any other EEOC requirements, right? And so that is something that is in the pipeline. Obviously, nothing, the chamber will never do anything required reporting or anything like that, but working with companies to say, oh, let's make sure that we're not putting this massive burden, Marvin, on your clients to say, prove to me you're authentic in this way. Okay, now prove to me you're authentic in that way. Okay, now prove to me you're authentic in this way. Okay, now because just keep it sort of on the level playing field, and that's what we're hearing from small companies, that they're getting, everyone's asking, and they're all asking different. So. Ida has put in here that DEI for LGBTQ plus people is more problematic than DEI for POC. That's not uncommon. One of my projects is on the LGBTQ plus community and making sure that that inclusion works. In fact, we just launched a resource desk to help any company that cares and wants to do more, help them care and do more. And part of the challenge in that is there's a different set of discriminations and negative sentiments against them. You can't sort of deal with them in the same way. And they have different issues, right? The LGBT community, dealing with them, that community can't be dealt with monolithically, either from the pillars within them or even their intersectionality, right? The experiences of a African-American person in the LGBT community is different than Hispanic, white, religious, non-religious, disabled, not disabled. But it's definitely something to manage for sure. Oh, look at that. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Put the link in the chat there.
One last question for me, Lawrence. What do you believe is the role of local chambers? What role do they play in orchestrating, encouraging, connecting businesses around this discussion, around the importance of DEI? Does the Nationals have sort of not a mandate, but an expectation about the role that chambers play in this dialogue in communities across the country?
100%. Right. We have the U.S. Chamber. There are approximately 3,000 local chambers across the country. And the U.S. Chamber has its own equality of opportunity initiative, of which a number of local chambers, small or large, it doesn't matter, but a number of local chambers have engaged with. And I can obviously make sure I can independently connect the Franklin County, Chambersburg County with that. And to be honest, like, I have never run into a chamber that wasn't receptive, right? And I don't always work with, I don't know if Noel's laughing at me or not. It's okay. But I don't, Chicago, I'm absolutely Chicago and Atlanta and all that are fine. But even, I've mentioned Paul Fry earlier in Washington County. He's been very receptive to this type of work. Other folks, I've worked with other, Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? So maybe a little larger, but still they're not some big metro where you'd expect them to be metropolitan, right? And the expectation for them is that not that they are sort of the expert on, right, diversity inclusion on the micro level, like how businesses engage in it, but they are usually very good sort of stewards of, we need this business community to be competitive, right? That's the only thing chambers care about at the end of the day, because that's their mandate, right? How do we make this community more attractive to new business, help our current businesses grow, right? And no one is going to be able to make an argument that ignoring diversity and inclusion is the way to grow a community now. Absolutely, there's no way that argument can be made. And so the question is, so I haven't met a chamber that wouldn't make it, but I have met chambers that haven't thought to make it, right? But have certainly been receptive. So we do often the local chambers, and there's also hundreds of what we call demographic chambers. So women's, Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and some are in smaller places. Others are regional. So there's definitely ways to engage with them as well. And obviously that's kind of their raison d'etre, right? To do this, that exactly. So.
Lawrence, we need to wrap up. It's
okay.
11 a.m. and we need to transition to the next workshop.
You got it.
Yeah, but no, that was a really great discussion and conversation, and thank you, everybody.